Hello there. What you are about to listen to, is what's known as a Torchlight episode. Torchlight episodes are designed to be a little bit longer, a little bit more free-flowy, like you're talking over a cup of coffee with a friend. Or you just sat down to lunch and it's a lunch table talk. You know, something casual. So what you're about to listen to is nothing about politics per se, but at the same time, a bunch of politics, government, and military nerds are going to get together and talk about something super cool from a galaxy far, far away. So, from the studio that brings you the Pathfinder Report, we hope that you enjoy this first episode of the Pathfinder Report, Torchlight. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pathfinder Report. My name is Ethan Harper, and I'll be running point as your host today. Today, in a very decorated studio, we have some very illustrious guests here. We, of course, have Mr. Joel Gruey, the director of Project Pathfinder. We have, once again on the show, Mr. Chaz Toplicar. And making his first appearance here on the Pathfinder Report, we have Mr. Brand Edmonston. So we have quite a packed studio today for one of our favorite topics. If you're watching here on YouTube, then you can definitely tell that all of us are nerds and we all love Star Wars. So even though this is airing on May 1st, May the 4th be with you indeed. So how is everybody doing today? Did you all have a good day?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to this all day, man.
Very excited. This is the second time I've been on this podcast, and when I saw the invitation for this, I don't want to completely downplay the last interview, but I am way more excited about this one than the last one.
My day was hectic, but it was good, and I'm here finally after much delay. Thank you for your patience, and I'm excited about this conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we have today is like a prelude might have talked about, or here in the episode, what we have today is a special episode called a Torchlight episode. And this is kind of like a cup of coffee type of episode where we are casually strolling through a list of topics of conversation here. And we have chosen, since it is May and since the previous iteration of Project Pathfinder, Generation Joshua, did a podcast episode on May the 4th. We wanted to take the opportunity to do another one of those because, again, we're all nerds. So thank you guys so much for showing up for this one. And before we really get into it, I'm going to start off with an easy question that's not on that list. And you might have to dig and realize how old you are. But what was your first interaction with Star Wars that you can remember? Like, what is your first core Star Wars related memory? And I will go first. For me, I remember very distinctly watching episode 4 with my dad on VHS. And I remember because he had taken out this special black box triple VHS set and said, okay, I'm going to show these to you. Get ready. And so I sat down with my dad and we watched Star Wars episode 4 for the first time. And I just remember the trench run at the end with Luke destroying the Death Star, spoiler alert. Like that was just like a core memory that I think unlocked my fascination with like fighter jets and things like that. That has carried forward till today. But that's my earliest Star Wars related memory. And then it's just kind of, gotten worse. I mean, evolved from there. So
fair enough. I'll go next. I've got one. When I first encountered Star Wars, it wasn't me seeing it. It was my best friend who'd encountered it a couple days ago when his dad had showed it to him and was trying to explain to me, who'd never heard of it before, what was going on. And it made no sense to me. We had like a 45-minute, hour-long discussion. I was trying to figure out how there was a planet that could also move, that had trenches and got like, it made no sense because he was trying to explain the Death Star and he did not have the words. It was hilarious. We were elementary age, I think, maybe barely junior high, but somewhere in that area back in the day. And eventually he's like, I can't do this. So he went and found his dad. And well, I think a couple days later, they set up like a family movie night when ABC used to broadcast family movies. And so they had Star Wars coming up. And I got to sit down with him. Like, we did like an overnight display and like blitzed all three of them. And it was amazing. And that kind of went from there. Great fun.
Awesome. What about you, Chaz?
So I had a little bit of an unconventional approach to Star Wars. I was 12 years old. I was not supposed to get involved in Star Wars. My parents were a little bit picky about the movies that we were able to watch. But I had a friend that I really enjoyed spending time with. And part of the reason why I enjoyed spending time with him is because he had two video games that I really enjoyed: Star Wars Jedi Academy and Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Yes.
And I played those games
Excellent.
ridiculously. And I eventually convinced him to get me Star Wars Battlefront 2 as a gift, which came, I still have it to this day. It came in a box and it had 5 discs that I had to load onto a PC. So if you want to date any of us on this podcast, if anybody's shaking their heads, you know how old they are. So 5 discs to load onto a PC. I brought it home. I showed it to my parents, and my dad was like, "You're right. It is time that you watch Star Wars." And we watched the original trilogy within that week because he was convinced I had risen to the occasion and it was time for me to learn about the light and dark side. So that's how I got involved.
Nice. What about you, Brant?
So my first memory of Star Wars, I was aware of Star Wars, but I knew that it was something that I was not allowed to watch because I remember distinctly walking. We lived in Utah. I was probably like 4. And I remember walking out of my bedroom to try to get my parents, and they were watching what I found out eventually was A New Hope. And what I distinctly remember was that one transition where you see R2-D2 just kind of like lift up and the screen like lifts up with him, because you know that Lucas was all into the weird transitions. And I remember being very confused about what was being watched, and they immediately paused it and told me I had to go back to bed. And I asked them what it was, and they said it was Star Wars. So that was my first awareness of what Star Wars was and the fact that it existed. And I don't know why that sticks in my memory so clearly, but it does. And then my first introduction to Star Wars was, of course, watching A New Hope with my family, and just having my mind blown by, like from the moment that you see, the Star Destroyer fly over the screen at the very beginning, it was just like amazing.
Yeah, and the visual effects for those movies were just kind of ahead of their time, honestly. Like the
practical effects.
Yeah, the practical effects were fantastic. Like, I've watched there's a YouTube channel called Corridor Digital that breaks down visual effects stuff all the time. Fantastic stuff, and they have spent so many episodes going over all of the visual and practical effects that were used in Star Wars, especially the first 3 movies, and it was just incredible. So
just as a random side note, you can cut this out later. That was a great era for practical effects, because you had Star Wars that was doing that at the time. You had Alien that was done with Ridley Scott in 1979, and the practical effects, there was 2010, 2001: A Space Odyssey. All of those in that era, the practical effects for space cinema were so good, and there isn't anything like that anymore because it's all CGI. The practical effects for those, which were all little ships, I remember watching something about Star Trek, and they had what did they take, like a razor blade or something, a razor blade cartridge or something to make the little shuttle that they did, and it is so good. All those movies from that era, practical effects for space, you can't beat it. It does something to your brain.
Also, the practical work that they did for the Foley and the audio, like the way they made some of the sounds.
Oh, yeah.
Like where you get Chewbacca's roar, where you make how you make the blaster sounds, all the rest of it. Like that's having taken some classes in that and knowing a few guys that work in that field, they're still, you get them going on it, they just won't shut up because it's just amazing what was done and how they did it. And it got you to sounds that we just didn't have.
Still exist today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Shameless plug for Project Pathfinder I Govern Camp and Star Trek. If you want to see the original series Starship Enterprise model that they used for the actual show, it is in the National Air and Space Museum. So we go there.
No way.
Yeah, for real. You can go there and see it on the field trip on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm. And if you're in the DC area, if I understand correctly, and the exhibit might have closed and it might have moved, but at one point in the Dulles Space Air and Space Museum,
Udvar-Hazy Center,
the Udvar-Hazy Center, there was a full-sized X-wing from the newest movies.
Yep,
that's so good.
I didn't realize that. That's cool.
Yeah,
it's
very cool.
It's amazing. They had it. They're doing restore work a while ago. It was, I don't know where it is now, but it was so cool.
Yeah. Anyways, so let's go ahead and jump into the questions that we have here. Really quick, we want to kind of come back to reality before we jump back into Star Wars. Joel and I, obviously, we're here for the podcast, and I'm just here to kind of move the conversation along. But Joel here has been in politics and ethics and stuff like that. You talked a little bit about that during the Iran episode a couple weeks ago. Chaz is kind of an expert per se on military tactics and things of that nature. Brant, how do we want to put this? Brant is.
I'm very interested in politics and the way that it actually practically impacts people. I think that it's very easy to think of politics as something that's just like out there and things that politicians are doing. But when it really comes down to it and the very, nuts and bolts, brass tacks ways that it impacts people, for example, tonight there's a big referendum in Virginia talking about how whether or not we're going to redistrict, and the fact that they're trying to pass a constitutional amendment to amend the constitutional amendment that we did just a couple of years ago, trying to make redistricting bipartisan, but apparently that's not interesting anymore. So we're going to try to make it completely, and I say the government is trying to make it completely partisan in every way, shape, and form imaginable right now. And we're just kind of waiting on pins and needles to see whether our federal elections will be even remotely not jury rigged. It's like politics is very practical, and people often lose sight of that.
Plug for Brant on the politics side. Brand is one of the few people, and I'll say few people because I can count them on one hand, of people I've had a debate with on politics, and I've walked away from it saying, oh yeah, I think he was right. One of the few people, and that's pretty hard to accomplish. So Brant knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm. He does. Also, if you start dealing with him on naval warfare and military history, he also does a pretty solid job there too. So you'll see it bleed over here.
Yes. So, and then of course, the one thing that we all have here in common, well, I'm here hosting, but Mr. Toplikar and Mr. Edmonston are both on the Pathfinder board of directors. And then Joel, you are on the Pathfinder board of directors.
I am as well. Yes.
Oh yeah, he's there too.
He's there too, for obvious reasons.
We have not hit quorum. This is not a formal board meeting. That being said, we're going to nerd out though.
Okay. So let's get into it. So the first section that we wanted to go through, and this is kind of an open discussion, is kind of power, politics, and governance in Star Wars. And I think, and this is a giant spoiler alert, if you've never seen Star Wars in any way, shape, or form, you should really, really go watch Star Wars. It's been out for a while.
first six.
Movies. Watch
The first six
movies. Yes,
the first 6. Yes, and Andor. Go watch both seasons
and Rogue
of Andor.
One.
And Rogue One.
I mean, there's more. There's more. But when we say go watch Star Wars, what we really mean is go watch the first 6 movies, and then
Correct.
If once you're there, once you've jumped in the pool, then we can drag you to the.
I actually think so. I think if you're going to watch it, you should watch the first 3, then watch Rogue One, because Rogue One is still one of my favorite Star Wars movies, and then you should watch 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, solid.
I think
Very
that
solid.
should be included in the original 6 timeline.
Oh yeah.
Just so that you get the full breadth of what's happening. Everything else you can add on after, but for your full understanding at the beginning of Star Wars, 1, 2, 3, Rogue One, 4, 5, 6.
All that being said, spoiler warning out of the way, and the order in which you should go watch the movies. Brant, was the Galactic Republic actually functional, or was it already too corrupt and bureaucratic to survive?
At what point?
At the point we first interact with it in the movies. Episode 1, the blockade around Naboo is happening, and the Republic is kind of getting itself in a bind. So I think actually that's a good point. Let me put this. I think we need to set some boundaries right here, right now. If it has appeared on screen in animated or live action canonical Disney film, then it is up for grabs. If we want to really crack open the can of worms that is the extended universe, no. We'll be here for days.
Yes. Do it.
If we want to crack open that can of worms, we're talking Death Troopers, which is canonical zombies in Star Wars. And then we have an entire young adult series that's all about Obi-Wan Kenobi and how he wasn't actually chosen as Qui-Gon's apprentice originally. There's so much. We can't do it.
Here's where I think it's relevant. I think we pull from the EU, or what's now considered the EU, but was originally canon, when it's relevant to understanding the questions we're working on. Because, for example, if you're going to talk about the Galactic Republic, like the Old Republic, the High Republic, the Galactic Republic, the Fall, the Empire, the New Republic, there's a lot of material that was put together in understanding that, the background, et cetera. You want to talk about Valor, you want to talk about the Trade Federation, you want to talk about the blockade. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is known, but wasn't put in episode 1. So, to answer that question, you're going to need to start relying on some of those sources to a degree, but we'll try and keep it focused.
Yeah.
I respect that.
Yeah. And then before the show, we were talking about Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. I guess those are up for grabs too, since technically they appeared on
Disney.
Screen.
That's Disney.
Yeah. Okay, so Brant, back to the question after my side tangent on setting bounds.
After you trying to keep the parameters.
Good luck.
Refereeing.
Yeah, here we go. Listen, nothing's gonna get done otherwise. Do you think when we see it in episode 1, do you think that the Republic is already too corrupt and bureaucratic to be effective or functional?
So, not to be too obnoxious here, but I think that the critical words there are effective and functional. And I think that goes back to what exactly was the Galactic Republic designed to do, and because you need to know what something is supposed to accomplish in order to determine whether it is accomplishing that thing effectively. I think what is pretty clear is that in terms of the ability to actually prevent, for example, one planet from being starved to death and having its entire economy, wrecked, or one planet from getting completely taken over and occupied by another planet, clearly it was not effective at stopping that or doing anything about it. I think that the role of the Republic, at least at the point where we see it in episode 1, was to kind of set some basic galactic standards and policies, but not like it's sort of like the UN. It's an entity that is out there with the design that it can help set some guidelines and recommendations. But the Galactic Republic had no enforcement mechanism aside from the Jedi. And the moment that you gave it enforcement mechanisms, and even the Jedi, they weren't even able to stop the situation by themselves. It required them, assisting local forces on Naboo to stop the corrupt and unjust blockade and then ultimate occupation of the planet. So it depends on exactly what the organization was designed to do. I would say in terms of like setting standards that people could kind of generally agree on. Yeah, sure, we see that a lot in the Clone Wars. We see them passing some bills and things that helped encourage people to join on and support causes. That's basically what it was a highlighting things. It was a way to get in front of the galactic stage and highlight issues and then find people who are willing to work on those issues. But in terms of actually like being any sort of governmental entity with any sort of authority, no, of course not. It's just like the UN. The UN is a great place to highlight issues that are coming up. It is a terrible place to try to solve problems.
Okay, so I'm going to agree and disagree with what Branch just said there. In this sense, first of all, it was a disaster in functioning. But I do think there is an aspect that they had put together that could be effective, but understand that it was only designed to do certain things. Like the Republic was structured so that there was a very, very, very high level of sovereignty at the planetary level or at the kind of the senator entity level, whatever you're the representative of, because let's be honest, they had entities that had senatorial seats that weren't planets and weren't nations. The Trade Federation being an obvious example. But they had corporations as voting entities in their legislature, which honestly caused a lot of problems. In fact, this is where we wander into the EU a little bit, but Valorum hated that. He was the original chancellor in episode 1, and he worked very diligently to try and stop it. One of the reasons the Trade Federation was part on board is like basically taking this guy down. This was one of his campaign goals, was to strip those people from, or those entities from voting or having control or influence in the committees and in the legislature, which, okay, there's some merit to that. That said, to Brant's point, there's no military. They have at best, the judicial forces and the Jedi. Neither of those are significantly strong enough to go do something. So they had regional navies, planetary ships, etc., defense fleets, but not a military. And therefore, if you wanted to lay down the law, they were kind of limited to economic or judicial enforcement mechanisms. And that has real limits.
So I'm curious, Brant and Joel, if you could rename it, because it sounds like Republic is not the appropriate term for it. What would you rename it?
Well, I mean, it is a republic, like in the sense that the entire galaxy is an entity, and you send representatives to represent your particular locale's interests. Yeah, it's a republic. I mean, the UN is the same basic concept, but it, yeah, I mean, it's all. I guess I see your point in that it's only a republic if you consider the entire galaxy and like an entity. But so I guess I could see your point there. If you're not considering it a governmental entity, then it's not a republic. But if you are, then
the issue they had at that point was that they had stripped down the enforcement ability of the Republic because of a long history that we are not going to go down rabbit hole of, to where at a certain point, the Republic used to be structured to have the ability to essentially override a system, a sovereign system, a planet, et cetera, and say, no, actually, you're coming under our direct jurisdiction, you're acting badly, we're directly intervening, et cetera. That was systematically stripped away over a very long time. So what you had was a really, really high level of sovereignty. But conceptually, those planets reported to a higher authority, which in theory had some sort of kind of, in a sense, it's a very, very disassociated federal system, almost a confederation rather than a republic in the sense that they pass laws that are then uniformly applied across the spectrum. Slavery is illegal theoretically in the Republic, but it still happens. The spice trade is illegal, but it still happens. And their enforcement abilities against these are limited at best. It was a weak government, however you want to cut it.
We definitely do see instances where the law is, is relatively effectively applied. Like, so for example, I'm sure there is some slavery involved in the Republic as you bring it up, but like, for example, when we end up on Tatooine in the first episode, Padme is surprised that there is slavery. And then we're reminded, well, Tatooine is not actually part of the Republic. It's in the Outer Rim. It's not a Republic planet. And there's a reason why the Hutts, for example, are, on Tatooine and in control of Tatooine. And yeah, sure, they operate, clandestinely and criminally in the Republic, but they're outside of Republic jurisdiction as their main headquarters, base.
It wasn't consistent at the minimum the way the law was that law was enforced. They did have basically what you'd consider like indentured servitude and like economic slavery that definitely would happen to some degree that happened within it. You also had several races that were routinely exploited in and outside of the Republic in functional slavery. But yes, it was illegal. And in the it's kind of like recognizing when you're looking at the best side of a society, obviously that's not there, but there was plenty of not nice, dark, gritty corners where some stuff really it wasn't corners. It's like massive long sections that you had some of that corruption showing up in. And to be fair, some of those businesses we know from the movies were working very actively to prevent enforcement of those laws because it was financially in their interest to prevent that.
Out of curiosity, and this is something that gets more into government and institution, do you think the Republic, in y'all's opinion, do you think the Republic could have reformed itself without falling into the Empire? Do you think that turning into the Galactic Empire, let's say without Palpatine,
that's a big deal.
Let's say that if Palpatine had been defeated, Anakin had not turned to the dark side, and the things that were in place at the end of Episode 3 were in place, aside from Anakin going to Darth Vader and the death of Dooku and the death. If the Emperor had died fighting Windu and Anakin, do you think the Republic could have survived, or do you think the Republic was inevitably going to break?
I have never thought about that before.
So I have, because I'm a nerd and I'm like a little crazy on that regard. And there's been some interesting thought put into that I've gotten a chance to read. I think it could have, but there's no guarantee that it would have, right? Like the possibility of it being restored would require kind of a Cincinnatus style figure to show up and say, I will take power, I will set things right, and I will walk away. The problem I'm running into is that I'm not sure who is that character. You have Tarkin running around that's fairly high ranked at that point in the military, but he is definitely not going to go that direction. He likes power a lot. Okay, so that's out. You have the delegation of 2000. Basically, you've got Mon Mothma and you've got Padme and you've got Bail Organa and some of the crew that's involved in the Senate there. Maybe them. But I don't think you're getting the Confederate, like the separatist systems back in. I think at the minimum, the Republic is reforming in a smaller form and basically being put on a test run to say, show me you can do better. Or it might be in a slow disintegration or basically a retrenchment. Now, that's happened in its history before, so it's possible, but I think it would depend on the leader a lot.
So to echo Joel's point, I think one of the things that I would say is I don't know that it necessarily requires a Cincinnatus-style individual. I think one of the things that you can look at, and this is obviously a completely different comparison, but United States in World War II, FDR taking power, a ton of federal actions occurring in order for the good of the entire nation to execute the war as effectively and unilaterally as possible. The state of war in the galaxy and everything that's occurring would still require a lot of the execution of those powers, a lot of the consolidation of power into a more federal style, Coruscant focused government, I think they could have recovered over time. I think what would have affected it would there have been more conflicts later on? Because with the initial conflict, right, the Clone Wars, big deal. Everybody's involved. We're trying to execute a significant amount of Coruscant-focused power. Over time, there would have been a lot of effort, kind of to Brant's point, right? It's an unconsolidated type of government with a lot of autonomy on the specific planets and their government structure. I think over time you would have seen an effort to get back to that, but it would have taken a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would have been painful, if not impossible, assuming there aren't any other conflicts that occur. Right? So the Clone Wars ends. There is a period of peace, I suppose. And if there's not, then you would have had significant issues. If there is conflict, I don't know that the Republic would have recovered. I think they would have been too confident in the consolidation of power at Coruscant. And I don't think they would have ever given up. Because, you think about episode 3, right? Where everybody consolidates power into the executive, the emergency powers. If conflict had continued to occur in the galaxy, I don't think those planets would have been super confident in getting rid of that authority unless there would have been other conditions given to them. So if conflict had continued to occur after the Clone Wars had ended, I think it would have been impossible. I think if conflict had ended after the Clone Wars, I think it would have been a very long and painful road, but I think we would have eventually gotten back to the original concept of the Republic over a significant amount of time.
Well, you'd have two big obstacles in your way to pull that off, though. I think you're right, Chaz. But one of the things that Palpatine did is he put through 2 amendments to the Galactic Republic's Constitution. One of them was the Reflex Amendment. One of them was the Sector Governance Decree. And that's where you get your Grand Moffs in the Empire, where they show up, where they have these kind of over-sectors with like the Grand Admiral Thrawn type characters and Tarkin and the Grand Moffs. They did have jurisdictional direct authority over the planets in their sector. That was put in place under the Republic, still not the Empire. And so that would have had to be unwound to a degree. And then the Reflex Amendment that basically gave the emergency powers to the Chancellor, which functionally, let's understand, when we say the Chancellor, what he really is essentially the Prime Minister, because he's part of the legislature and then takes the executive function. So really what we're not looking at, we call it a republic, but it's not the American Republic we're looking at here. The better example of this form of government is really the British parliamentary system minus a king. They didn't really have separation of powers between their legislative and their executive, which makes a whole bunch of messes, and there's no real checks. Their check and balance was their courts, which were apparently even worse than legislature, the legislature executive entity as a whole, and then their monastic religious order Jedi Knights. That was their trifecta of checks and balances, except the Jedi had been subsumed under the Senate with some form of an oath of allegiance to serve them. At that point, the structure is a mess.
Yeah.
Fixable maybe, but not easy.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I say over a long, long period of time.
That's fair.
I mean, and I think the biggest thing, the thing that I would bring up is the reason why I think that by the end of the Clone Wars, the Republic's fall was probably pretty much inevitable. I would not go so far as to say it was definitely impossible to come back from, but would have been very, very challenging, is because institutional trust was completely shot. So in other words, that's why. So you have you go to the movies. So illegal blockade happens. The Jedi Knights are sent. An attempted assassination occurs of these Jedi Knights who are supposed to be the diplomats. They're going to work out a peaceful solution. Peaceful solution not recognized. Planet invaded. Queen in exile shows up to plead her case before the the Senate, and it's, even with a friendly leader, who is the non-checked and balanced leader, he can't get squat done because the courts and the bureaucrats and all these other things. So the person who is seeking help from this leader who is friendly to her votes him out of office because he's impotent. That is what you call a crisis of faith in the institutions. And I'm not saying illegitimately. That is a crisis of faith in the institutions when you are voting your own allies out because they can't help you. And then, what we see is Palpatine, who wrests all the power into his own possession, and that that transition causes partially because he's manipulating things. So again, there is that two-step, but the separatists also leave the Republic. Some of the separatists leave the Republic because they want to see the Republic disband altogether, and they want to consolidate more power themselves, and Palpatine promises that. A lot of the systems leave the Republic because they saw what happened in Naboo, and they saw what's happening in all these other, in all these institutions, and they're like, heck with this. This is doing nothing for us. We're going to go make a government that actually works for us. And see that in you see that with multiple systems throughout the Clone Wars. The problem, of course, being that they leave with these bright-eyed, ideas, and then they end up in a situation even worse than what they left. So
prime example being Mandalore.
Mandalore stayed independent because they didn't want to do either. Mandalore at least had the foresight to say the separatists are just as bad.
And to that point, the separatists build a government that is almost an exact replica of the Old Republic, or the Galactic Republic. They have a Senate, they have a Chancellor who basically becomes the Supreme Chancellor and basically runs all the things, and a non-competent court system.
But it's a federation.
Yeah. Different
federation. Therefore, it is so much better.
I don't know if it's a single Cincinnatus figure, but short of somebody who can kind of, for all intents and purposes, blow up the Republic as it existed and throw out all the bad stuff, and restore some semblance of democracy without turning into Palpatine themselves, without turning into a dictator, or, and I'm not recommending this as a form of government, but people forget Cincinnatus was a dictator. So in Roman history, Rome had an understanding that sometimes you need someone to have all the power, and you give them all the power, and they do what needs to be done, and then they're done. And ultimately, the check was there was a Senate, and the Senate issued that power for a specified period of time, and when that period of time was done, that person automatically no longer had the power anymore. Of course, that doesn't always work out.
It doesn't.
Which is why the American government, of course, was created with its own checks and balances. But short of that kind of a situation, I don't know how the Republic heals itself, because there was a lack of faith in the institutions before the Clone Wars even started.
Yeah.
And in isolation from a trustworthy figure, because they'd also basically segmented off the Jedi Order, which theoretically was a moral authority that people also didn't know anymore, and therefore couldn't trust to come in and help balance that out as well. They had it was a stacked set of issues. To be fair, Palpatine had been setting that up and his predecessors for a long time. There is the conspiracy aspect.
If we're like, conspiracy aside, if we are saying the Chancellor died, like if the what if starts at Anakin and Windu, or Skywalker and Windu defeating Palpatine in the duel, 90% of the Jedi Order is dead.
But you have a clone army
at that point.
And
but
no
you have
Order
a clone
66.
army and no, and now you have like that further, to your points, that further breaks down the trust of the institution. Like everybody who just watched these galactic peacekeepers get gunned down by their own guys. Like they don't, regardless of what your opinions of the Jedi were at that point, they're all dead. And so that's like you're seeing infighting and stuff like that.
The Windu fight is before 66.
Correct.
Is
Correct.
it?
It is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Still, though, to the point, Jedi kill the Chancellor. Still a significant amount of distrust in the Jedi Order.
Are you kidding?
True.
Oh yeah, like the handling,
it's one of those
possibly cover up, scandal, mess.
Yeah,
it's stupidly high.
To Palpatine's credit, when it got to that point, it was darned if you do, darned if you don't, right? Like, darned if you do kill me, there's going to be a lot of distrust in you, which already existed, by the way, a significant amount of distrust in the Jedi. Darned if you don't, because, by the way, 90% of your order, 95, 96% of your order is going to be completely wiped out. And everybody's going to be like, oh, thank you, praise. Like, we're out from under the thumb of these religious peacekeepers. So, I mean, the Jedi, all things considered, were doomed to no matter what with Palpatine's plans.
Yeah.
By design. Yes.
So kicking it around in the government and institutions circle one more time before we move on to another topic. And we kept hitting, these were kind of keywords of our last question for you guys. Are emergency powers ever safe? Or does Palpatine prove that they inevitably lead to abuse?
When you say safe, does that's kind of the critical piece of that question, because emergency powers, by nature of the word, I would argue, are rarely safe. But you can make a fairly compelling argument that they are on occasion necessary. That said, when the emergency powers have no counterweight that is strong enough to wrest them back, I would say that, I mean, you may roll the dice and have it come up even sometimes and it works out, but I'd say you're about 50-50 shot of it not working out. Which means unless there's some sort of very large check that can be brought in and say, you have abused your power, and then wham, down comes the hammer to balance that back out. Because let's just be honest, people are sinners. Star Wars people are sinners. People are sinners. And they tend to like power, authority, and to do stuff to their own self-interest. So I would say emergency, I mean, we've seen this in the US many, many times. Emergency powers get given. They last for a time in reasonable ways, and you start seeing abuses. Sometimes you see abuses right out of the gate. Rarely do you see abuse. Rarely could I point you to an emergency power, or an emergency tax for that matter, that lasted long enough to work out fine and then go back to the way it was. Like, ever. I can't think of one. That they may be necessary, but emergency powers have to be paired with an equally effective counterweight, in my view.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're ever safe. But I think that's, I think that's the problem of being in any kind of civilization, is safety isn't the ultimate good. And sometimes you have to do things that may be to a detriment in order to accomplish a greater goal. So to answer the question, no, I don't think they're ever safe. I think there's too many examples throughout real world history. And I think in Star Wars, there are plenty of examples where emergency powers are not safe. At the same time, I think there are critical moments that exist for a civilization where the cost benefit analysis is weighed in, yeah, it's not safe, but the alternative is so much worse that if we don't do something now and make sure somebody can do something right now with everything that they need in order to accomplish that, it will be so much worse for us. Yeah, they're not safe, but I think they can be good in a muddy way.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all that, and I would just say the real difficulty when it comes to things like emergency powers, what you're dealing with is what is the ultimate red line? So, for example, you are, the famous line is, those who are willing to sacrifice liberty to gain security deserve neither. I think I could be butchering that quote, but
yeah, that's good.
The whole point of, like, this is getting a little too high level, but the whole point of government is ultimately to keep people safe. Like, government was instituted to provide groups of people with collective security. Now, the question is, what are we trying to secure? Are we trying to secure your health and well-being? Are we trying to secure your rights? Are we trying to secure your property? Some combination thereof. How are we balancing these things? So I think that there's a certain level of, all right, understand that anytime you are giving someone emergency powers, it's because you deem that the freedoms, the responsibilities that you are giving up are a worthwhile sacrifice for the ultimate goal, which is some form of safety, security, protection that you are expecting in return. And the question is, how much are you willing to give up for that safety and security? And that is always the trade-off. Everything is a trade-off. And in the United States, our government was structured in such a way that typically we value our freedom more than we value our security. And therefore, our powers are structured such, in theory or in ideally, our powers are structured such that we will be less safe so that we can be more free. And just anytime you're talking about emergency powers, it's not that they are inherently bad. It's that there is inherently a trade-off between what you're giving up to get something else. And we as a society need to collectively make that decision. Kind of when we vote people into office who are going to enact, emergency policies. Like, I think of Joel when he was on town council during the pandemic, and, no one, not, again, why am I bringing up all these bad real world topics?
Because emergency powers
because sci-fi is how you explore real life issues.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
emergency
Palpatine
powers
is
are never
a-
used in good times. Like emergency powers indicate that there was an emergency to enact them to begin with. So anytime anybody's like, "Oh, emergency powers this," or executive order that, there's stuff going down. There's bad stuff going down. And if it's not next door to you, it's somewhere else that requires a government to make a decision on a policy. And it's a break glass. If you have to break the glass is going to get everywhere,
Now,
but
may I
you're
make
still getting to the
an
thing.
observation that I think comes out of
Yeah.
Star Wars, but also comes out of real life pretty thoroughly here.
Yeah.
Build your emergency policy before the emergency arrives. That's great, okay? Because I've seen it when you break glass, open cupboard, and you discover there is nothing. That's what we had to deal with.
We have to build an axe.
We have to build. Yeah, no, literally, we build policies on the fly to fix stuff. And you're like, this is not good. But keep in mind, that's literally what happens in Star Wars. Like, he builds his emergency powers on the fly. And when you are negotiating limits in a crisis with a gun to your head, you're not exactly in a good position to build counterweights and checks and balances. It tends to go
more
really
nefarious.
bad.
More nefarious than that, Joel. He did not build his powers on the fly.
Well, he didn't.
He was prepared.
He had them planned
well
in advance.
Right.
And to that point,
the
right?
Senate did.
That's why your point is so particularly relevant. Build the emergency powers before it happens, because if you get somebody who gets those emergency powers who doesn't align with what you believe, they already built the axe and they know how to use it. And that's a problem.
Well, and that's a huge reality with politics and also just kind of life in general, is the person with the plan wins. It doesn't matter if it's the best plan. It doesn't even matter if it's a particularly good plan. If they have the only plan, their plan will win. Because something is better than nothing in a crisis, or at least that is very much the emotional, visceral response. In a crisis, action is expected. And if no one has a plan, but the person who is consolidating power to themselves, they're going to get it. So
what's the famous quote that I love so much? General Patton: "A good plan violently executed right now is far better than a perfect plan executed next week."
Yes, so good.
Sometimes you just got to go for it, and it might not be exactly what you want. That's fine, but again, if you wait, somebody will come up with a better plan because you waited too long.
Speaking of plans, I believe it's time to move on to a little bit more of a violent section of this particular talk. Chaz is very excited. So gentlemen, do we want to talk about Clone Wars era, or do we want to talk about Empire era first? Republic or Empire era?
Chronology.
Okay, all right, fine.
Chronology.
Then with that, Jazz, what do you believe the biggest strength and weakness, the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of a clone army can be or is? Because I have opinions.
I'll go for the biggest. I'll go for the biggest weakness first and foremost, because it's the biggest weakness for every military that's ever existed forever and ever on infinitum. Logistics. Logistics are the biggest problem that you can ever face in a military, and the problem that they don't really talk about in the Clone Wars, right? That's kind of hand waved is like, oh, here are 1 million units with 1 million more on the way. I butchered that quote. I'm sorry. But, there so many soldiers come out of nowhere. Where's the infrastructure for that? Where's the supply line for that? Where's the resourcing that's required in order to sustain a military of that size? So the downside of having a significant amount of personnel that you can utilize in an engagement is, well, if you don't have supplies, that's a problem. I'll hearken to real world real quick. The Russian military in World War II, tons of personnel. And there are stories that have been told about the Russian military where the first guy gets a rifle, the second guy gets a clip of ammo. When the first guy dies, you pick up the rifle and you have ammo. That was the strategy because the supply lines didn't exist. The infrastructure needed for the personnel wasn't there. You see this with the German military in World War II. One of the things that Americans have done super, super well, albeit not as great as they should do, is we supply our soldiers better than everybody else. So the clone military, it's kind of a ex machina kind of thing where it's like, we've got 1 million soldiers and we can supply them too, I guess. Like that, it's not really covered, and it really should be. That's a huge weakness. Huge bonus for them is, it's kind of talked about in the Clone Wars, right? You got soldiers that can actually think, soldiers that are independent. And yes, I will go into the EU a little bit more here because I don't care what the rules are. You've got ARC troopers.
Yeah.
You've got commandos.
Yeah. They appear on screen. So you're fine.
Sure. But the ARC troopers and the way they portray them in the Clone Wars is not actually accurate to the EU.
Oh, no, not at all.
Not at all.
ARC troopers and commandos were trained by Mandalorians and bounty hunters that Jango Fett particularly singled out to do the training for these soldiers. They were, if you use the EU example, they had fewer cognitive restrictions than the rest of the clones. They could think more independently. That was their entire purpose. ARC troopers could think more independently than the traditional soldiers. Commandos could think completely independently, whereas everybody else had certain restrictions. With that, you have the ability to leverage independent thinking, strong, quick reaction tactics that the Trade Federation couldn't use. A lot of theirs was programmed, and until they got into the later models where they had, I'm assuming, to use a dirty word, AI learning of some sort, where their commando droids and certain other droids could kind of learn on the fly and utilize advanced tactics and adjust as necessary. The initial proposal of the clone army was a functional, intelligent, needing self-preservation military that the Federation did not have. Right? Even though they're clones, they still want to survive. And survival in combat is not a detriment. In fact, it helps you adjust your strategy as necessary in order to accomplish the goal or overcome the enemy.
Those are all solid points. That's really, really good. I will say that the logistics is kind of one of those things that just gets hand waved, just like Jedi magic and midichlorian count. And
it's only shown when they need it for the plot.
Correct.
If I need a convoy, if I need a medical station, if I need a recovery suite, if I need a planet that's producing material, war materials, etc., great. Voila, there's some logistics, and we use it as the MacGuffin for the episode. But no, they don't normally go into it. It's been really fun watching, like, just, nerd, right? When you see people sit down and go, okay, what would it take to fight a war like this? Now, to be fair, totally to nerd out for a second, the hyperspace route system that Star Wars uses means you have choke points and you have roads and routes where you can actually have some sort of control mechanism. It's not just a big open field where everybody can fly in every direction. There's actual methodologies that they can use for that, but it's still crazy. And they don't ever show the why that happens. They also never show why these massive home, like the core systems, never really get hit hard by the Trade Federation, or if they do, it's very much a surprise. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's in the EU they never really dress out because, frankly, it's kind of boring. But for nerds, when you're trying to figure this part out, it's really interesting.
Well, if you want a really good example of how all that functions, you need to dig back in the archives to a game that has a ton of modding love and a ton of fan service to it that has been renovated constantly and updated constantly through the years. And the game is called Empire at War. It's so much fun. I remember sinking... I have to have had at least 100 hours in that game. It was so much fun, but it talks about logistics and supply lines in that. And there is a mod that takes it to like Age of Empire level of complexity and beyond, like almost Hearts of Iron level of complexity. That is the Republic at War. And that mod is huge, and it makes you really think about the different kinds of technology you have at your disposal. Going back to the MacGuffin point, though, where it's only supply lines are only mentioned whenever it's relevant to the episode. We see episodes where Jedi are stuck with like a cruiser left, or then we have a giant supply hub that's pumping out a ton of stuff to the military. So we see logistics actually in play, just not. It takes kind of an overlapping perspective to see all of it. One of the
long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the adventures of the quartermaster is not as interesting. Okay, like
a freaking man.
Yes,
as entertaining as it could be if you get the right. I mean, okay, if you had Alan Tudyk do the voice, maybe, but as a rule, it probably isn't going to be that. I mean, you could have a great droid series off that; it'd be very funny. But other than that, it's not happening, and that's okay. So you have to kind of like read in and assume how this is going to work. But
yeah, and then for me, I think the biggest strength was the training that they received, right? Because we see clips in different Star Wars media of clones getting trained and how they trained, and to your point, the different levels of training between the different kinds of troopers. Like it was just that uniformity in training leads to so much top tier communication that is just, you train for years to get to the level of communication that those guys had already, because they all played from the same playbook since they were born, pretty much, and had slight unique personalities to flavor it, but it was all pretty much the same.
Well, and if I can jump on that super quick, I think training is a key factor, right? Training is super important. But I think one of the things that they really highlight well in Star Wars: The Clone Wars is the camaraderie that exists between the clones, right?
Oh,
they're brothers, right? Vode on, to use the Mandalorian quote.
Yes.
Like, it's not just training. And again, I'll jump back to some of the stuff that I did when I was in the Army. Training is good, but training is only as effective as you can trust the guy to your left and your right. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, when you're in there doing something, it doesn't matter what that guy to your left or your right looks like, believes, thinks. It doesn't matter. If you can trust him, then you know that you can survive, or at least you have a fighting chance. The training is really important. But I think what's even more important is one of the points that I just made previously, is the survivability, right? It's not a singular self-preservation thing. It's a we together, fighting together, can effectively manipulate the battlefield for our advantage and go home. And I think, you talk about training, you could plug into a droid and give them all the training they need. What you can't get from a droid is the desire to make sure that the guy that you've grown fond of to your left and your right makes it home.
Yeah.
And they make a little bit of personality tweaks and stuff to the droids in the Clone Wars and everything. But there's something special about the Brotherhood of the Clones and how much they care about their fellow soldiers, and how that training that you talk about comes together into that brotherhood to be like, we're fighting this together. We are going to do our best for each other, and we are going to make it home, regardless of whatever the situation is. So clones superior to battle droids because not training, but because there is camaraderie and there is a desire for survivability there that is far superior to anything a droid could ever have.
A really great example of that is the whole the whole 3 or 4 episode section in the Clone Wars where you have the bad Jedi Prong Crow.
Yes. Oh my gosh! Yes.
Clones. They're trained. They're trained to follow orders.
Yes.
And how many
So
times good soldiers follow orders. They are trained to follow orders. They follow orders. They follow orders. They follow orders. What makes a clone rebel against their Jedi masters? When their Jedi masters tell them to their faces that they don't give a crap about their safety. Well, and not about their safety, but they don't value the unit. When their general says, "I couldn't care less whether you live or die," the clone says, "But I care whether these guys around me live or die. I care whether you're leaving that, clone for dead." And that 2-3 episodes really demonstrates what you just described super well.
Yeah, I had never been able to put it into words why those episodes impacted me and so many other Star Wars fans before. I had never been able to put it into words, but it occurs to me now that you say this. We have watched Captain Rex, so again, huge spoiler alert. This series of episodes takes place on a planet during a campaign against a very elusive enemy, and Anakin Skywalker is not present with his troops in the 501st. He leaves them under the orders of another Jedi. And during this time, and again, this is where we get into spoiler territory, during this time, the 501st is sent on a mission where the enemy has found clone armor, repurposed it, and the enemy is wearing clone armor. And the moment that Rex takes the helmet off of a body and finds out that they're clone troopers is one of the most I've got goosebumps right now just talking about it. It's one of the most impactful scenes in the entire show. aside from stuff that came out in the new season that Disney Plus launched with, that also has some really cool moments too. But like, just heart-wrenching, oh my gosh, I hate this guy so much. He just made brothers kill each other. And that's like it is somebody who has gone, a character that is so evil because they have driven a wedge through what you have watched, what you have seen been demonstrated as a family for 5 years of watching television, 5 years of growing up with this show. Like, I'm sorry if you binge the Clone Wars and you get all of this lore, that's great, but you didn't grow up with this show. And that was just, it was like a slap in the face, dude. Like, and then the whole thing with Dogma, like,
there's nothing worse as a soldier, and I've only experienced this in training, but I'll tell you, in training, like, there's nothing worse than committing fratricide as a soldier, because you know you screwed up so badly that you hurt your own people. And then I can't even comprehend what it would be like if you were given orders to do that, and it wasn't because you screwed up, it was because you were doing what you were told to do. Like,
I can't
emotionally, like, I've been there when we've screwed up and we've, like, in training environments, and we've accidentally shot at our own guys. That's horrible. That's a pretty embarrassing circumstance to be in. You're like, wow, I am a horrible soldier. I'm a horrible human being. Happens all the time. I can't imagine being in a circumstance where you're ordered to do that, and then you realize after the fact, oh, those were our people, and somebody at a higher level was okay with them dying. That's horrifying. That's a horrifying concept. And again, harkens back to the clones needing camaraderie and survival to be a superior fighting force. That breaks down all of that. Every component of that. Because at that point, they're just treated like droids. And that's the exact opposite of what makes a clone superior. And yeah.
Okay.
Great example.
I have a question I want to throw in here now. Real quick. Do you think, Chaz, Ethan, etc., I want to throw this at you guys, the clones made a very effective fighting force? You know, one clone is worth 10 droids. You know, you see the different comparisons in fighting skill and battle effectiveness, etc. That's all out there. But the other thing the clones had was that they were segmented off from the rest of the Republic. They were grown on Camino, put in, VATS, trained, etc., and then deployed. And the rest of the Republic didn't really experience the war. Like, like an experience when the Separatists would invade or something, but there wasn't like my cousin or my friend down the street signed up. Like, there was a little bit of naval officer corps that was running around that were non-clones. Like, they had a few of them, Yularen, some other people, etc. You have a couple, but like, I can literally start listing names because it's not that common. You get the planetary defense forces that have their local people enlisted, but as far as the actual fighters, other than the Jedi and the clones, there wasn't a personal, like, buy-in component, awareness, realization, empathy, support. And
100%
at the government, basically the Republic wide, right? And it allowed people to look at it and say, well, that's not actually my war. Like, I actually don't have an interest in it. They're not my people. They're not what I know. And it kind of divorced the civilian society away from the galactic, the Republic's effort. Did that actually, I mean, obviously there was a scheme, right? We know the Jedi didn't set up the clones. Like, that was part of the villain scheme. Like, how impactful is that relative to a weakness of using the clones, because you don't engage society as a whole for the effort?
Well, I'll let Chaz take a swing at how that's a weakness, and I will inform you. Or is it? But I think it's really important to finish the story of the clones. We see what happens to the clones post 66 in two separate mediums. We see it in Star Wars: The Bad Batch, and we see a hint of it in Kenobi. In Kenobi, we see a homeless clone trooper on the side of the street, begging for handouts, and I'm pretty sure he's got some of his armor on, he's clad, and He's 501st, and yep, and there are lots of fan theories out there that the guy recognized Obi-Wan Kenobi because Skywalker and Kenobi were thick as thieves, like where they were pretty much with each other all the time. So there's a theory floating out there that that trooper knew Kenobi. But the other thing, the one that I was actually pleasantly surprised by the Bad Batch for, was that we see a character from the first season of Clone Wars that reoccurs every once in a while show up one more time. And it's Senator Chuchi from Pantora, and she is fighting for clone rights, like she has been since they first show up in that on that Frost planet. Like the morals of those stories were great; they were fantastic cartoons. But watching these characters reoccur, Senator Chuchi knew Ahsoka, she knew Padme Amidala, she knew Duchess Satine, and so
Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Anakin and Obi-Wan. So she's constantly showing up, and the last time we see her, she doesn't die. She's able to escape, but she's constantly she's fighting for clone rights. And spoiler for the Bad Batch, she's part of an assassination attempt in the show, and the Bad Batch shows up to intervene. So these the end of the clones story is that they are severely detached from galactic society because they weren't integrated. They weren't a race from any particular planet. And at that point in the Bad Batch, their home is gone. Not that they know that, but their home world has essentially been destroyed and their makers are gone. So it's like it would literally be like a country here on Earth calling in aliens. The mothership gets destroyed, and we have this alien race left to integrate into society. And somebody from a nation, not including the one that called them here in the first place, is advocating for their rights.
I don't think what the clones experienced is all that dissimilar to what U.S. soldiers experience. Fewer than 1% of the population participates in the United States military. And realistically, for those people who live in the United States, because of the fact that most of our conflicts are abroad, if you just ignored what was happening on social media, it wouldn't matter to you. Like, yeah, you might run into one or two people who have been involved in a conflict overseas, or you might hear some politician, right, advocating for soldiers' rights or for them to be taken care of using some horribly disfigured soldier on C-SPAN to be able to advocate for their position. But realistically, it doesn't affect most people. It has zero effect on most of the people that you interact with on a daily basis. I don't think being involved in the day-to-day is what makes a good soldier. And I think you can see this kind of in the examples that you were some of the examples that you referenced, Ethan, but also if you just look at the Clone Wars and some of the stuff that happens afterwards, right? You look at Star Wars Rebels and some of the other things. Like the clones still have a significant passion for the Republic. Even the 501st Rebellion in Camino, that is extended universe, I don't care.
It's Battlefront 2. It happened on a screen.
The 501st oppression of the Clone Rebellion on Camino. All those clones were fighting for the Republic. Like, that's very heavily in the dialogue there. I think that being divorced from it doesn't necessarily make them less effective as soldiers. I think what it does is, and to Ethan's point, if the civilian population isn't far more invested than they need to be, which is very minimal realistically, you get a jaded society that doesn't really care and ultimately just utilizes the clones or soldiers as tools for the ends of the greater good. So if anything, it's not even a commentary on behalf of the clones. It's a commentary on the behalf of everybody else that the clones were willing to fight for the Republic because that's what they believed in, passionately, because that's what they were. I mean, you could say that that's because what they were indoctrinated in. That's fine. Doesn't matter. They were still fighting for something that they believed in. I think one of the things that I think about on a regular basis is, especially considering all the rhetoric that's happened recently regarding conflicts overseas, and especially regarding rhetoric regarding, service members, that I've seen. The civilian population, if anything, needs to be far more cognizant of what's happening abroad, and those who are involved in those conflicts, because as the clones display, they don't really care. They're there to do a job. They're there to make sure that everybody else is safe. That's what they were bred for. That's what they were born for. If you ask most people in the United States military, I'm sure they'd tell you the exact same thing or something very similar. And to Ethan's point, advocacy on the back end is super critical, not because they're necessarily an alien organization
No.
that has been imported in, but because the civilian population has intentionally alienated themselves so much from a conflict that doesn't really affect them on the day to day, that those people who fought for them have to be advocated for.
Yeah.
And that is a commentary to the negative on society, not on the soldiers.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah. Well,
All
I've got
right.
a question. I've got a question for Chaz and Brant, that is military style, and it's kind of we are going to kind of move to the fade between the eras of the Republic and the Empire, and we're going to talk about Chaz's favorite movie. I don't know if it's your favorite movie, Brant, but we're going to talk about Rogue One. So Rogue One and Andor, talking about the true rise of the rebellion, what kicks off. If you've never seen Andor, spoiler alert, you can literally watch a 6.5, 5.5, 6 hour movie, and it is Rogue One and Episode 4, because scene for scene, Rogue One ends right as Episode 4 begins. So you can watch that back to back. So that's in that we see what might be called morally gray tactics, and I haven't finished watching Andor season 2. I have to admit that. I'm sorry, I have failed. I tried to do the homework and failed. I'm moving houses. Okay, don't email me. From what I understand, Andor ends right before Rogue One begins. So that series goes to Rogue One, and that Rogue One goes into Episode 4. There is a ton of morally ambiguous gray, what would be defined as gray tactics, from the start of Andor all the way out to the end of Episode 4. Is the Rebel Alliance, are the Rebels' willingness to use morally gray tactics justified at the point that they're at in the Star Wars universe, because the Empire's been around for a little bit? Are they justified in using these morally gray tactics, Brant and Chaz? Would these work? Because we're still in the frame of the Republic, where everything is centralized around Coruscant. So realistically, could the rebels, despite whether or not they've been using gray tactics, would they even be effective against this massive centralized military?
Well, I don't know. I don't know why you're asking me. I feel like Joel teaches a whole class on this at, shameless plug, I govern Project Pathfinder I govern camp in the summer.
Yes,
but I'll take a stab at it anyway.
good.
I'll take a stab at it anyway. So the thing about I think the thing about morally gray is too ambiguous. I think
Okay.
that there are some things that are displayed in Andor, just since you bring it up, and also just generally speaking, in espionage and subterfuge that are perfectly acceptable, and some things that are probably not acceptable. And I think that the reason why that is a gray area is because strong cases can be made one way or the other, and different people draw the lines in different places. For example, I mean, and just very practically speaking, we all understand that treason against your government is worthy of death. Some people don't agree with that, but there isn't a government in history that doesn't say if you commit treason, you should be allowed to live. Like everyone says treason is death penalty. And the founding fathers understood that. We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They knew darn well that what they were doing meant, potentially, death sentence. So clearly they were committing a crime that was worthy of death for the sake of what they believed to be right. Now, does that mean that I think there should be no line, that all things are on the table? No, I don't. But I think that when you are, you know, without delving too deep into just war theory and without delving too deep into legitimate actor engaged in legitimate warfare, and some of these things, there's a lot that's on the table that is not normally on the table is never on the table for your average citizen, and might not normally be on the table when you are even just engaged in normal national security. Like when you are hearkening back to our Emergency Powers Act, like there is a time and a place for some things that are appropriate situationally that would not be appropriate in all situations. And what does that mean? And I think a prime example of this, and this is not subterfuge, but this, think about the atomic bomb. When we ended World War II, that was not a flippant decision that was made by the administration. That was a calculated decision based on a tactical analysis of the situation of what would it take to subdue Japan. We would have to literally invade. We would have to fight city to city, street to street. We've seen plenty of examples of what that looks like in terms of death toll, casualty count, both in Europe, a la Stalingrad, a lot of these other, city conflicts with an established opposing populace, and Japan, what they've done across, all of the islands that we'd gone for, fight to the last man. I have my personal opinion on whether that was an appropriate action or not. Obviously, nuclear warfare, not an appropriate action 99% of the time, or 99.9% of the time even, but potentially appropriate under some circumstances. So I think
there's a statement for this podcast.
Chaz,
that's catastrophic, my opinion.
No,
yes, Brent. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
This is the way.
Also, caveat: I've taught the ethics class for the last 2 years, so
Yep.
Come on, Brent. I've got some credibility here.
Dude, I don't know what you do. I'm in my own class. I don't know what you're doing.
I don't know what I do either. Anyways,
I'm trusting you to do your
job. I need to go to the class. Okay.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. Anyways,
camaraderie. It's the camaraderie, man. I'm trusting you. You're like down the hall and you're taking care of your stuff, and I'm taking care of my stuff, and it gets done.
The brotherhood, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I totally agree with what Brand said. I think, just he literally said exactly what I was thinking. It's the executive powers in the exact same way. You need to set boundaries for gray areas, right? And I taught this in my ethics class multiple times over. If you set a standard and you need to set that standard, stick to the standard. to your question, Ethan, would it be effective? I think it depends on what the end goal is, right? Would it be effective in signaling to a greater republic? There are some people that are annoyed. Yes. Would it be effective in getting the republic to ignore them? Probably not. Not right off the bat. Insurgency operations, while they're really good at indicating to a greater power, hey, I'm kind of upset with how things are occurring, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be victorious in your ultimate goal of being independent, right? I'm going to bleed into a little bit into another question.
Go for it.
Insurgery operations do not defeat bigger powers. Period. Right? At the end of episode 6, everybody's like, the rebels won. No, they did not. They just convinced the Empire, maybe suppression of every single system isn't the right choice, right? You look at any example throughout all of history, right? Everybody, I'm sorry, I'm going to ruin a lot of children's history understanding, right? 1776, we did not beat the British. We just convinced the British that it wasn't worth them investing in anymore. If you look at the War of 1812, we got beaten up 7 ways to Sunday. And they only left us alone again because they were like, not worth it, right? Same with Vietnam, same with Afghanistan, so many other examples. They don't beat a bigger power. They just convince them this isn't financially or this isn't really, it's mostly financial, right? It's not worth it.
You have inconvenienced me beyond investment.
Sure, exactly.
Yes.
Listen, I don't care what anybody says. If the British had brought their full weight into the American Revolution, we would have lost. Period.
Oh, yeah.
End of story. Like, same with any other conflict versus a guerrilla warfare operation. If the greater power had brought the full weight of their authority into that environment, they would have lost. Period. What an insurgency does is convince the greater power this isn't worth it for you. So, to your point, is it effective? Yes, it is incredibly effective if you can communicate well enough what it is that you are intending to do. So with Andor, right, I would say it wasn't super effective because there isn't a separation of systems that they're trying to say, please leave us alone here, and we're going to keep pestering you until you leave us alone, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't the goal in Andor. So therefore, it was completely ineffective. What happened later on in episode 6, and I'm going to go into the extended universe a little bit, right?
Go for it.
There was a coalition of planets in the rebellion, or what they had deemed themselves at that point was the New Republic. They said, we want to be left alone, and we will keep fighting you with insurgency and conventional operations until you stop fighting. And they did. Like, the Empire didn't fall when the second Death Star was destroyed. It immediately went to another Grand Moff. Like, the authority of the Empire went to another Grand Moff. The Empire still continued in its campaigns all across the galaxy. And the only thing that actually happened was they had a dividing line between them and the New Republic saying, all right, you know what? Chill. We've got our stuff to control. You want your stuff? Fine. You can have it. It's not worth it for us to continue to battle you.
Now, okay, I got to interject a little bit there because you did have 2 other effects that happened. You lost the command and control system of the Empire.
Sure.
And for a while, there was absolute chaos. So you had infighting with the greater power, which made that far more achievable. And again, wandering into the EU, Mon Cala and a couple of the other planets had managed to successfully repel Imperial occupation and had enough infrastructure that they were starting to churn out those Mon Calamari Star Cruisers, which you needed to be able to go toe-to-toe with an ISD. They still weren't actually a match for it, but they were at least able to stand up to it. You
Sure.
needed that conventional military. The insurgency on its own wasn't getting there. But what the
Correct.
insurgency could do was distract the heck out of the Empire to where they're focusing on running around squishing stuff while we're building something over in the corner. Okay.
Right.
But you can't, what you can do very well is draw their attention and embarrass them so they're having to go squash bugs while they're not looking at the thing you're building behind the curtain. In that area, it can be very effective. If you have a curtain you can hide behind or a star system.
And that works super well. Works super well for the New Republic until, Grand Admiral Thrawn came along.
Thrawn? Yeah, I know. I know.
I don't have to worry about that. But no, to answer your question, is it effective based on the Andor series? No, it's not. You got to have clear, defined objectives. You can't just be angry at the system and fight the system with violence when the system doesn't understand what you want. It doesn't work. They're going to be like, why do these people keep blowing stuff up? It doesn't make any sense. Why are they so angry all the time, right? You have to have clear, defined objectives. And that came along much later. And so, to Andor's credit, Rogue One, all that other stuff, it was establishing what was going to be. But at the time, honestly, for something as significant as the Empire, it's just it's an inconvenience. Why are these people so annoying all the time? Don't even know what they want.
Well, that's the ISB. They're sitting there going, these are annoying bugs we have to squish. It's not entirely a lethal threat to the Empire. It's an annoyance and an embarrassment that's going to justify these bigger things. And by the way, then eventually the Navy shows up. But what's the quote? I think is it Urso's quote? Rebellions are built on hope. I think that's the line. And I think what's being communicated there is that there is an idea they're reaching for that's beyond just saying no and resisting. They actually have to be going somewhere to build something to replace it. I mean, honestly, think about it. The Republic fell, and instead of having something come in and invade it, it was taken over from the inside, right? There was an element of converting it into the Empire. The Republic shows
how
up.
Democracy dies.
To thunderous applause. Right. But there's an element with the Alliance. I mean, what was the formal name of the Rebel Alliance? The Alliance to Restore the Republic, right? There's actually an element of saying, we're not trying to necessarily even kill it. We want to take it back over and restore it to what it ought to be. Really, you have, in a sense, you kind of have one continuous entity of government with the question of who has control of the levers. And they're driving it in stupidly different ways. But there's an element of that where it's the same building that has the capital in it for the High Republic, the Old Republic, the Empire, and the New Republic, at least until we don't count those last 3 movies. But at least in the EU, the Imperial Palace and the Jedi Temple and the Senate, the Galactic Senate, those buildings change hands multiple times and they keep going.
Yeah.
It's power, right?
What's super ironic about the Rebel Alliance, kind of going back to what we originally talked about, right? Is as soon as the Rebels actually established a system, right? The Rebel Alliance for the New Republic, there were a lot of Confederate planets that joined. A lot of them. Because they were like, yeah, we were trying to fight this system to begin with. This is great. We're going to jump on board too. It's super funny because you go full circle, exactly to your point. This changed a bunch of hands. It's funny if you look into the politics of all of it. And to Brant's point, which is perfect, right? They join the Federation. They're like, oh, this sucks. It's almost even worse than what we were trying to get away from. And then when the Rebel Alliance comes on, they're like, maybe we'll try again. Second time's the charm, I guess. Let's go and try and fight this new version of the Republic. So, I think to answer the question, at the beginning, no, super ineffective. It did inspire an institution that eventually brought everything together, which is what established the New Republic after the destruction of the second Death Star. But before then, like Joel said, kind of just an annoyance to a lot of these people.
I pretty much agree with everything that you guys said. I will very mildly I'll very mildly addend kind of that to say, ineffective from a military standpoint, ineffective from a destabilization standpoint, the actual actions, but something that insurgencies can do. We don't see tons of examples of this kind of insurgency, honestly. around the world. Some, but not a ton. And not well, I'm not going to go there. But something that an insurgency can do is raise awareness of I'm not alone. So you see this talked about a little bit in oh my gosh, Rebels. But basically what happens is, okay, someone crops up over here and they make a statement, they release a manifesto, they take an action, and now suddenly I'm like, hey, I've been feeling this too. I'm not crazy. People are doing something. And then you go seek them out, you find them. Pretty soon pretty soon you are in this, you're able to create a groundswell. And then suddenly you have enough force and enough support to really start making waves. Like insurgent action, and you guys talked about this very well and illustrated it very well. Insurgent action is never going to be enough to truly bring down an established, powerful entity. What it can do is it can raise, it can kind of cause enough joint dissatisfaction to coalesce to create something substantial. And like kind of just to consolidate and carry out the point that they were making, the Rebel Alliance ultimately became a fighting force that was able to do something. Not overthrow the empire in its entirety, but actually do something as a consolidated fighting force, not a real insurgency, not hit and run tactics. But you needed all of those individual people who were upset and doing insurgent this and insurgent that to come together to create the Rebel Alliance. You have Saw Gerrera off poking the bear, and he's not helping it. He's not doing anything positive. All he's doing is making it harder on everybody. He's making life more oppressive. He's making he's making people be less secure, and he's accomplishing nothing. And then in Rogue One, you see the Rebel Alliance is in its nascent form, and they're all about to disband, except Jyn Erso just randomly decides, they're all freaked out. They're like, we're going to die. The Death Star is a big, terrifying thing. So we're just going to give up. We're going to go home. We're not going to keep pursuing this. And then Jyn Erso says, you know what? Heck with that. We need to be together. We need to have hope for success. And that's only going to be if we're together. And so I'm going to go figure out how to get rid of this thing. So it's the coalescing of support around an idea, and that's something that an insurgency can help with. And by the way, that's why every single oppressive regime immediately squashes freedom of communication and freedom of gathering. What's the actual terminology?
Assembly.
Assembly.
Thank you, because it's 10:00 p.m. But freedom of assembly. So it's like, if you want to be an oppressive regime, you immediately limit what people can say to each other, and you immediately limit who can meet with who, and in what kind of groups. And that's why Iran shut off their internet, because when their internet was on, they had millions of people in the streets, and they had to shoot 30,000 of them in 2 days to maintain control. And then they turned off the internet, and then nobody knew if anyone else was doing anything, and they're not going to walk out on the street by themselves. They'll go out there if there's 100,000 people out there, but they're not going to walk out there by themselves. And so now all of a sudden, okay, nothing's happening in Iran right now amongst the general populace. I'm pretty sure they're not happy with their government any more now than they were 3 months ago. Pretty sure that's not the case. But nobody knows what's happening. And so that's really where an insurgency can do something.
Well, and to Brand's point, right? Rogue One is really the pinnacle of where the rebellion begins, because they're able to strategically, coordinatedly, I don't know if that's a word, hit a significant imperial strategic outpost, right? Not just, oh, we're going to blow something up, right? Like the rebellion alliance, right? Vessels are there. They are engaging in combat with the Empire. And the tipping point is when the Empire is saying, this isn't going super well. Let's just nuke it. And you can't really cover that up anymore. And there are a lot of people that are publishing that on the rebellion side saying, whoa, look at this. Don't you want to be careful? And that's following after what's the city that they just completely annihilate? Jeddah, where they just
you got Jeddah, and then it's the Battle of Scarif.
You got Jeddah, and then you got Scarif that they just completely annihilate because these rebels are no longer just blowing something up because they're annoyed. It's now we have a collective fighting force that has an opinion that is going for an ultimate objective, and then you can get buy-in from everybody else. Because to Brant's point before, it's just Saw Gerrera out there. It's just making everybody angry, including the rebels, because they're like, what are you doing, bro? Like, stop blowing everything up, please.
It's like, I needed that. Why'd you blow it up?
So then you have a coordinated effort that, one, costs the Empire, again, talking about you can't actually beat a larger power, but if you economically make it difficult for them, you can start to raise questions. Scarif, significant Empire investment. One that they had to nuke themselves.
Right. Well, I mean, they lost what? 2 ISDs, the planetary shield system. They nuke the planet. The rebels lose basically one big Moncal cruiser, the Profundity, whatever its name is. But like the Persecutor, the Intimidator, and like both go down. Like they literally like do the ramming sequence where they drive them into each other and then down into the shield gate. And we saw this earlier in Andor too. Like there was an element on the part of the rebels to like capture the Empire's failures and the idea that must be something better and broadcast it. Like they knew that they had to do more than just have these minor battles or even in this case a major battle. Like they needed the public to know.
Well, and to close this off, because I'm going to reference my favorite scene of all time, the moment where you realize that the Rebel Alliance has made it is the hallway scene with Darth Vader. Because it's no longer just the ISD. It's no longer just stormtroopers. They've sent in the big bad because this has hurt them. And now they need to fix it. And they need to fix it quick. So they send in the Dark Lord himself to solve this problem. And that's why I think Rogue One is so perfect, right? Because it's that tipping point where you go from, it's just a coalition of a bunch of really angry people that keep blowing stuff up. It's making everybody angry to, okay, now we're taking you seriously and we're going to do everything we can, not just, bring to bear as much power as is convenient, but we're going to do everything we can to stop you. And that's when you realize, that's episode 4 is that, or Rogue One and episode 4 is that perfect transition of it's just the beginning of an insurgency to now, okay, Empire's taking you seriously, and now you can start to economically, financially inconvenience them enough to where that one day they'll turn around and say, it's not worth it. And you'd think they would have learned that after the first Death Star, but I guess they had enough capital to flex that they were like, let's do it again. Why not? It'll be fine. But after the second one, they finally were like, okay, maybe not.
Well, the transition in that scene between earlier when they didn't want to fight and they're like debating just disbanding the whole thing, and all of a sudden the guys are like making it 2 feet and dying as they pass the car down the hallway to get the information down to the Tantive 4 to get away. But they at that point they went from I don't know if we're even going to do this to I believe and I'll die for it.
Yeah,
and in rapid order. And that, I mean, at which point we're getting to the, you are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor, take her away. Like we get that sequence happens in very rapid order. And suddenly the opening of episode 4 is very different once you have the kind of Rogue One sitting there looking at kind of framing that up. But there's a change in the Alliance in the understanding of the people, in the understanding of the leaders, and in the understanding of the personnel that happens in about 20 minutes in that movie.
Well, and that's the funny point about insurgency, right? The more, and you again seen this time and time and time again throughout real world history,
the more the larger power clamps down, the more inspired the people become to rebel. And that's to Brand's point. That's why they shut off things as much as they can, because you got to stop it right off the bat. Because if they keep going, it's only gonna get worse. And so
here's the icing to that. Go and watch Rogue One and then Episode 4 and pay attention to the timeline.
Yep.
Both of those movies happen over the span of 3 days, if not 4, because it's back to back action. I don't think we see any time for any of them to get rest aside from when they're flying away from the Death Star. But even then, they're chased by TIE fighters in Episode 4. So, like, you see no time for rest in any of these movies, because this tipping point in the insurgency, this go live, this igniting of the torch is like, oh my gosh, it's happening, it's coming together, and go. And that's why.
Well, and that's a perfect example, right?
And
right. You'd say like 3 days, which is three days a week, whatever. You have Jeddah, you have Scarif, and then what's coming next, right? Episode 4. What are they all freaking out about? Yavin 4. They're like, they're coming for us. We got to do something now, because they're just going to do the exact same thing they've done before.
Well, and it's the Tarkin doctrine, right? That overwhelming firepower that like wipe it out to where it doesn't exist. Like, they're going to obliterate him, and they know it. But at that point, their hand has been forced.
But that's the point, right? The more you clamp down, the more people are inspired. And that's why Tarkin in Episode 4 is like, yeah, we'll just hit him on Yavin 4. It'll be good. We just shut him down. It'll be fine. Right?
But Leia knew it. What is the line? The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. Like,
perfect example.
She has it figured out. And he doesn't want to acknowledge it, because the Tarkin doctrine stands in stark contrast to that. But there is an element of that comes into play, and that, frankly, has some very real parallels to our life today sometimes too. But man, they explore it in a way that's pretty dramatic here. They really do.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think it shows it. Yeah, I don't know if I'm willing to dedicate the 6-7 hours that are required for Rogue One straight into Episode 4.
Yeah.
But if you just mentally couple those two together, great example.
There's a great supercut out there that just puts them all together. It's amazing.
It'd be awesome.
The supercut for Order 66 is also kind of wild, because it cuts between Episode 3 and the last couple episodes of Clone Wars, and it's just, oh, man, it's so good. It's so good. But anyways, we're closing in on time. We've kind of already gone over time, but I want to hit one last.
I think we've hit like 4 questions out of the 9.
Yeah, but it's been
this is what this sort of episode is. We get into anything and just start digging. It's great. Yeah,
we need a part 2.
Oh my gosh! Next year, same time, same place. We'll figure this out. Okay, comes around at least once a year.
I want to ask one last question that kind of ties it all together, because the all 9 movies, well, all 6 movies really before the others came in. The 6 movies, the 6 Star Wars movies, are about Anakin Skywalker's character arc. It's his rise, his fall, and his redemption. The question that was in our list of questions was, how should we evaluate Anakin Skywalker's fall? Personal failure, institutional failure, or both? Because both. Because even you can make the argument that Palpatine was scheming that entire time, but his scheme was in place before Anakin was introduced into the picture, because the events of Episode 1 had already kicked off. He didn't know that Anakin was going to be in play. And at the end of Episode 1, yes, we should watch your career with great interest. Yes.
Actually, I'll diverge. I will say institutional failure, not both. But carry on.
So here's where I'm going to diverge off that. I think it's personal. I think it's institutional. But I would also argue it's a failure of community. Like, in the sense that Anakin was supposed to be in a community that cared for him. And there were individuals in that community that cared for him. And the Jedi were messed up beyond all possible belief when it came to caring for the people that served their order and served in their community. Like what they had essentially mutated, for lack of better terms, the Jedi Order, like from the old EU stuff into that era is frankly a disaster. And it was very fear driven in a bunch of ways. Okay. They didn't understand love. Although Anakin makes a good point about sacrificial love, at one point talking to Padme, trying to explain it, like he actually has a slightly better understanding of love than the rest of the Jedi Order did at that point. And frankly, they desperately needed it, but they had run far from love. And of course, that leaves an opening for the Emperor to use it, relatively speaking, or there's a corrupting tool. But again, not true love. It made it stretch the imagination, but a manipulation point. Like there was an element of that there. But that was very much a failure of the institution, because frankly, you've got a guy coming out of a slave background. You've got a person whose mom gets killed in a brutal way. Like there's no rational person goes through that in a way that doesn't leave horrific scars. And at least as far as the movies go, we don't see them being addressed. And frankly, that is like an epic blind spot failure in that regard. That said, there's some character failures on Anakin's part as well. And there's obviously a community failure. I would say that Obi-Wan did the best he could relative to being a friend within the structure of, the perfect Jedi that he was under and culture he was in. He did far more than most, but Mace and Yoda and a handful of the other people in there, epic failure. Council of First Knowledge, horribly done. The whole youngling training sequence. Oh my gosh, guys, do you realize where this person's coming from? Like, they couldn't handle real life problems with people, so they just took kids really early. Instead of actually recognizing that if you take them, like if you're working with kids later than that in the system, they're going to have baggage. And frankly, most people in reality do. And it was part of that disassociation of the Order from the rest of how everyone else lived. And then Anakin came in with lived life, and the system could not handle or help. Not in a malicious way, not handle, but just like it couldn't meet him with what he needed.
Brant, so we sandwich my deviation from this, or you want to just gang up against me?
I agree that the Jedi Order has issues. I think it's become very popular to hate on the Jedi Order, and like all the new the Jedi Order has issues. I'm not trying to say it was perfect. I think it gets a lot of hate, a lot of hate, and I don't think it's entirely fair or entirely necessary.
Agreed.
I mean, let me put it to you this way: the Jedi Order. Now, the biggest problem that I have with the Jedi Order was the fact, which Joel kind of referenced, was the fact that basically it was if you are force sensitive, you're coming with us, and that was pretty much just a forced thing. Like that's clearly ethically problematic. Like that's my biggest problem with it. If you get past that, and I'm not saying you should get past that, but if you get past that, I don't have a super strong problem with like pretty much most of the Jedi Jedi Order as an institution, because what they were is they were a monastic order. And monastic orders, the whole point of a monastic order is you are here to serve a purpose and a goal that is higher than yourself. And part of that will involve you having a community, but you understand that you're giving up certain things in order to serve that higher goal and that higher purpose. And it's not that can't go wrong. That obviously does go wrong. I agree with you. There was a certain amount of transition into fear-based, legalism and a variety of other things there. But we've seen this historically, and some people might hate this, but like historically, monastic orders in terms of Christianity and in the Catholic Church, whatever, those were massive benefits to society. And you had to give up a lot to be a monk, but you also got a lot when you became a monk. And so like, to me, that there's a lot that the Jedi get hate for. I really don't feel like they get hate for. in Anakin's specific situation, and this is where I say that the institution failed Anakin. I don't really go so far as to say the institution failed writ large. That's my personal opinion, and there are people who would disagree with me. The institution failed Anakin, one, by taking him when they knew they shouldn't, when they knew they weren't equipped to handle him, because they knew it. They knew they couldn't, and they did anyway. So they shouldn't have.
Yep.
And then they didn't do a particularly great job with him. They did some things fairly well, but they didn't prepare him in the way they needed, and then they ostracized him. And that's my biggest issue, is when you take someone, you make them feel isolated, and then suddenly, and that touches a little bit on the community thing, that you make them feel isolated and alone, and suddenly they're going to find their answers somewhere else. Yep. You can't just basically push him down, and expect him to not jump at the first chance to be made to feel significant elsewhere. And so they opened the door wide for Palpatine because they treated him as basically this jump up, upstart, whatever. And so that's where I will say institutionally they failed Anakin. I wouldn't say that the institution itself was holistically a failure. I would say institutionally they failed Anakin. He didn't have the community that he needed. I don't really think that he told anybody about the stuff. Like, okay, they knew that he was a slave. They should have dealt with that a little bit better. He didn't tell people what really happened to his mom. He didn't tell people what he did. Like, Palpatine knew about it, but it was a secret. It was a deep, dark secret. Why? Because he didn't feel like he could tell anybody about it. And that's the community aspect. I will say I view it largely as a personal failure, because the story of Anakin as portrayed in episode 3, and I think we see it throughout. But what Anakin is he does all the wrong things for all the right reasons. And I think that's some of the power of the story, in my opinion. It's
a tragedy.
It's a tragedy.
It is.
And like, if you look at him, if you look at his story, he loves his mom, and when that love gets in, when the person that he loves gets their life taken away, justice is needed. But does he, but he doesn't resort to justice. He resorts to vengeance. He doesn't resort to justice. He kills them all. He doesn't kill the person whose hut she was in. He doesn't figure out who was responsible for taking her in the first place. He kills everybody.
Not just the men,
but the women and the children too. So that is dramatically not justice. So he is seeking retribution for his mother's death, but what he does to accomplish that is absolutely wrong. He loves Padme. He wants to protect her. So what does he do? He seeks power that he shouldn't have. Why? Because he wants to keep his wife safe. That's not bad. It's a good thing to love somebody. It's a good thing to do what you can to keep your wife safe. But you shouldn't do something that is evil to keep your wife safe. And this is just a recurring theme. Those are two examples. And where does that leave him? Actually, no, I have to do is the third example. Okay. So you see in the second episode, you see him talking to Padme, and he's like, I don't think the system works. Institutions, not lack of institutional trust. I don't think the system works. I think you need someone who knows what to do and that can just do it. Well, yeah, that is a good desire. That is a reality. Guess who that is? That's God in real life. That's a king, a just and righteous king, which is what the form of government that God instituted in Israel. But that went south, right? Because people are sinful. So what is his final call? his final call in the episode, his final descent into evil is you and I. He's on Mustafar. Padme shows up. He says, "You and I can overthrow the Emperor and make things the way they ought to be. I have brought truth and justice to my new empire." That's the line. He does the wrong thing for the right reasons. I mean, heck, even when he chops off, even when he intercedes in the Mace Windu thing, he shows up, and Mace Windu's about to kill Palpatine, and Mace Windu says, don't listen to him, Anakin, and he needs to, he's too dangerous, and Palpatine's sitting there saying, "I can save the one you love." This is the fight that he has, and Anakin says he must live. Why must he live? Not because of anything. It's
not for justice.
It's not for justice. It's because he must live, not because it's the right thing to do, but because I need it to accomplish the good thing that is my goal. So he chops off Mace Windu's arm. Palpatine chucks him out the window. What does Anakin immediately do? He falls to the ground and he says, "What have I done?" And he starts crying because he knows that he's doing the wrong thing. Even though he has a good reason for it.
And that follows Vader through the next 3 movies.
Remember what I said at the beginning of this episode about Bran convincing me a number of times on one hand of things I might disagree with him. Anyway, but I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to try and disagree.
Chad said let him cook, not because Brant was on a roll, but because Brant was convincing him.
I was like, oh no, he's got some really good points.
Brand could convince me to convert to the dark side. Anyways, so
wow, that's bad. Don't do that.
This is the way.
Can't wait to see that on a meme somewhere. There's a couple points I'll make, and I'm still going to stick to my guns in the fact that I don't think that it was. I think there are personal failures that should be analyzed, but I don't think in any way, shape, or form they are as great as the institutional failures that we see throughout episodes 1, 2, and 3. Here are the reasons why. 1, Anakin Skywalker taken from his home at a very young age, and the significant institutional failure that you see at the very beginning, which Brant referenced, is everybody knows that it's a bad idea to take him, and they do it anyways. Why? Well, because they like some of the dudes. So nepotism is the reason why the person who eventually is the downfall of the entire Republic of the Jedi Order comes about, right? They're like, oh, well, Qui-Gon Jinn was problematic, was a good dude, and now Obi-Wan is vouching for this kid as the chosen one, so sure, we'll let him in, even though he's too old, and they see great fear in him, right? There's multiple different earmarks that show an institutional failure at the very beginning. I don't think that's the significant point. I think the second point that I will make, which is super significant, is when the Clone Wars happens, right? Why does the Jedi Order let him continue doing what he's doing? Because he's good at it. Anakin Skywalker is a great general. He is incredible at combat. He is one of the best out front. Even though throughout the entire series of the Clone Wars, and even in episode 2 and episode 3, you see multiple different red flags. There are, like, Anakin himself is a very big walking red flag. They say it over and over and over and over again. He just does his own thing.
Allow me a dramatic interpretation. Anakin, that's not how you're supposed to do that.
Exactly. Right? Happens over and over and over again. They give him more and more and more leeway because he's good. And to Brant's point, I don't think it's entirely an institutional, like a holistic institutional failure. Because of the crisis that they were in, they were making exceptions.
Emergency
because
powers.
They had to, right? The problem with that is, while they were making so many exceptions for Anakin Skywalker, because professionally he was good at what he did. On the Republic side,
personally, they ignored him entirely. They ignored every single red flag. And come on. Really? Nobody noticed that he was in with Padme? Come on. Did they really not notice, or did they turn a blind eye because they were like, he's too good to kick out?
I mean, Obi-Wan knew. We know
Everyone
that Obi-Wan knew.
And the rest of the 501st.
But here's even the point. If Obi-Wan knew, why didn't he say something? Institutional failure again. Because Obi-Wan had too much of a personal attachment. Again, monastic order, which, to your point, Brant, at least monastic orders in our world don't kidnap children and make them serve. They at least need a voluntarily admitted process. But Obi-Wan still even turned a blind eye to it. And there are tons of other examples throughout the Clone Wars where Anakin worked alongside other Jedi where they were like, I don't know about this. This dude seems a little bit off, right?
But he gets results, which is what they loved, right?
Not just results, but dramatic results, which is what they felt they needed in order to accomplish their goal of ending the war. So institutionally, I think it would be it's far more of a failure. Sure, I think to Brant's point, which I agree with, he did all the wrong things for the right reasons, right? But in no way, shape, or form throughout his entire time with the Jedi Order was he facilitated to learn, to grow, to be better. It was a constant churn of, well, we probably shouldn't, but he's really good, so we're going to let him. Without any regard to what the downside might be on the back end, which, by the way, pretty significant, right? Even when they talk about him collaborating with Palpatine, oh, we'll give you a spot on the council, but we don't grant you the rank of master. And by the way, we need you to spy on the chancellor. There's no deep insight into what this might actually be. They're just conceding because, again, he's effective and the Jedi Order is using him as a tool to their ultimate end. Just like in the Clone Wars, Episode 3 is the culmination of the Jedi Order's willingness to utilize Anakin as a tool to accomplish their goals. So, final point. While I definitely agree with what Brant said, all the wrong things for the right reasons, I think if you're a part of an institution that's whole purpose is to train, mentor, and lead you to be a specific kind of inspirational figure, right? A monastic figure of sorts for the Jedi Order, for the Republic, for the distant populations on various planets that you interact with. If that's what you're supposed to be there for, they failed in every single capacity they could have with Anakin Skywalker. Not with everybody else. I think the institution as a whole was still a good institution. But because Anakin was so good at what he did, they were willing to make so many allowances that they completely ignored what their true duty was to, and that was to Anakin as an individual, Anakin as a Jedi, Anakin as a deliverer of light and hope to all reaches of the galaxy. They ignored all of that because he was good at what he did. And again, criticize Anakin for his decisions, but taken away at a young age, supposed to be mentored and led by this institution. I'm sorry, I don't have much fault for Anakin, who was really just cut loose from the very beginning as an incredibly troubled child and then continued to go through such traumatic stuff and was ignored every step of the way because he was good and because the Jedi Order needed results. So I think institutionally you see this in real life, right? You get results, you're good. You get a pass. It's okay. And I think, if anything, to me, the story of Anakin Skywalker is a challenge to us as individuals who are part of organizations that we feel passionate about. Don't let standard slip just because something good is happening if it's not being accomplished in a good way. It's our responsibility as leaders, it's our responsibility as members of an institution, organization,
As Christians.
to say, whoa, 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 as Christians, to say, whoa, 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 whoa. You good? Maybe you should take a step back. Maybe you should take a break. Maybe you need more wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you need some help.
Mm-hmm.
You can get there eventually, but for now, it's okay to stay here. We're not trying to hold you back. We just want to develop you in better ways. And I think that's what the institution should have done. I think that's what we as individuals in our various organizations and stuff should constantly strive to do. Don't hamper people. Don't bind them up in red tape, but make sure that they're ready.
Yeah.
Mentor, lead, guide, and instill wisdom so that way, when the choice comes along, they don't make the wrong decision for the right reason, or they don't make the wrong decision for the right reasons.
Yeah. And we could go on an entire diatribe on how that wisdom, that cautionary advice and mentoring comes across in modern society, like is really poorly executed in modern society, where if you say anything like that, immediately you're flagged as an enemy of the person you're trying to advise. Like, you're trying to hold me back. You're trying to make sure I don't get that promotion or that raise. I really need the money right now. Why are you in my way? Get out of my way. And that's an entire segue for a totally different episode. But
well, I think to that point,
points.
Real quick.
Yeah.
To that point, right? Because of the fact that he wasn't mentored in the proper ways, he saw that all the good things that they were trying to kind of tamp him down with, he saw it as oppression because they weren't doing their due diligence. They weren't guiding him in any regard. Yeah. So when they finally came down and were like, no, stop. He was like, this is unfair. How can you do this?
Well, they never bothered to build trust, so that he could feel that he could talk to them with a concern. Like in theory, there's an element of it would have been great if you told them. Also, it would be great if he thought he could.
Yeah,
there was a certain level of suspicion that comes in right from the get-go. Obi-Wan was the closest because he did know stuff and would still be able to talk to him. And there's some virtue in that, and there's some problems in that at the same time. But that element of being able to have a place where you can say, hey, life is not good right now, and here's what's going on. And be able to have that conversation. Everybody needs that because everybody gets in that moment at certain points of the other. And someone who can,
I think that's why it's so important, right? Don't just focus on the professional. Focus on the personal as well. Don't just be focused on the results and be like, well, I mean, he's good at what he does. I don't care if he's making crack.
Ethically sketchy decisions.
Right?
The hero with no fear, right? Like, that's the propaganda piece. And at a certain now, to be fair, we probably should at least recognize here there was an element of a third-party actor playing it, so that the Jedi couldn't deal with him the way they probably should have as well. So you do have Palpatine playing the game here too. So let's not entirely pull him out of there, because he was definitely playing mastermind, evil villain here. But and to your point, Chaz, there's plenty of other evidence of Jedi that were struggling with stuff in different areas where the Order historically did intervene in relatively speaking healthy ways. But yes, he was the guy they needed at the moment. He was, in a sense, necessary to utilize, and that meant you ignored red flags and you ignored problems until the whole thing came crashing down around you.
Yeah, to a certain degree, I think the Jedi Order was willing to sacrifice Anakin on the altar of success.
Yeah,
or emergency need. Yeah,
yes.
They were willing to sacrifice him for the results that he was willing to give them. And
they didn't have a plan, so when they opened the cupboard, they found an axe that Palpatine had put there, and it was Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, Anakin was the axe, and he was dang good at being an axe. Mm-hmm. And then when they turned around, they were like, oh, shoot, we shouldn't have had an axe. We should have had a fire extinguisher. Maybe that would have been better, right?
Yeah.
I think the institution was willing to turn a blind eye to too many things, and I think that's the big... I think personal choice is huge, but I think if you contrast that with the other Skywalker, right? who wasn't given so much leniency on his personal life, right? Like he was good at what he did, but there were so many people that were like, whoa, chill out. There were so many people like Obi-Wan telling him, no, you start here. Stay where your level is. You have Han Solo that's constantly humbling him. Princess Leia that's like, all right, whatever. Yeah, okay, you're cool. Who cares?
Moving
right?
on. Yeah.
Constant building of humility and understanding and wisdom, because those personal connections that Anakin did not have, because the institution didn't care. They had results. That's all that mattered. And that's why ultimately they led to their own downfall and Anakin Skywalker's downfall. That's thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's it.
We got 2 TED Talks out of that one. We got yours and we got Brand's. But that was...
Now we need to go and put a poll in who agrees with who, right? Let's see what happens.
Yeah, sure. There's a poll in the comments down below on this YouTube video. If you're here on Spotify or a different streaming platform, go to the YouTube video. Then we'll see. Was Anakin failed? Did Anakin make failure in character? Did the institution fail him? Was it a failure of community, or was it a combination of the 3? So I think we will end.
I feel like we all pretty much agreed it was a combination of the 3.
I mean,
No,
yeah,
you're right.
Yeah.
And again, it's not fair to Brant, because originally I was just going to hammer this home with my point, and he was talking. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna integrate some of that into my speech here a little bit.
The upside of going last is you can just keep building on what comes before. It's
So
true.
it's not fair. It's not fair. I'm utilizing Brant for his end results without worrying about his personal, stuff going on. Not worried about that.
Excellent.
So do not put that in a vote. No poll. We're all in agreement here.
I think what we'll do to wrap this out, because it's getting late for us East Coast folks, and we're definitely running a lot longer than we expected. But it's been a great conversation. This has been a blast, guys. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks
out.
for having us.
I think
Great.
I have a question, kind of a curveball, rapid fire question for everybody to wrap us out here. Let's say that a basically educated Star Wars enjoyer is here. They've only seen 3 of the movies, if not the what we are calling the 7 essential movies. If they've just seen the movies, they haven't really dug into Clone Wars, they haven't really dug into Andor or Rebels or whatever. What is a Star Wars character from canon or extended or EU? What is a Star Wars character you can name drop here for them to go look up and get sucked into Star Wars lore? And you may not cheat and say Thrawn, Joel.
His favorite character, obviously.
Well, there's a good reason why he is stupidly popular. And to be fair, the book version is infinitely better than what they did with him in the cartoon. Okay, let's just put that out there as well.
Valid.
Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command. That trilogy is epic. Timothy Zahn is amazing. All right, there. That's out of the way. Okay, you want to get someone beyond that? Someone we should go dig on?
I will go first.
Okay.
Go look up Kyle Katarn. Kyle Katarn is a fantastic Star Wars character. He's from Extended Universe, and there was even
Don't shake your head, Brant, you heretic.
There was even a video game around him. It was Jedi Academy 2. Yeah. Oh, there were 2. Oh, yeah, because that's right. It was Jedi Dark Forces and Jedi Academy 2. So fantastic Star Wars character. Takes place in the EU version of post Episode 6, where Luke is building the Jedi Order again, and Kyle Katarn is this smuggler that shows Force sensitivity, and he's brought in as a Jedi, and so it's just fantastic. It's great.
He kind of turns into the Chuck Norris of Star Wars. Like, really, he does. Like, it's epic.
Also, side note, heavy inspiration for Cal Kestis. Heavy inspiration.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt.
Great character, still effective in the actual canon lore today. Huge.
Anyways, all right. Anybody have any ideas, any takers, or did I steal somebody's?
Oh, I got another one. I came armed. but I'm curious what I'm not. I have this audio in my head that says it's a trap, so I'm going to let Chaz go first before I'm being the one at the end.
I'm gonna use a very. So I'll use the one that got me involved, Django Fett.
Oh yes.
And
yes.
So obviously significant part of episode 2. But the reason why it was so big for me when I first got involved in Star Wars, like that was the character I really dug into, is one, you get to understand a lot of the intrigue in episode 2 that you wouldn't get otherwise. Go play Star Wars Bounty Hunter if you get a chance, if you're into video games. Great video game that kind of explains all that stuff. 2, you get to have so much better of an understanding of why Boba Fett is the way Boba Fett is, why the clones are the way the clones are, why they even picked Jango Fett for the clones, because there was a reason. Tiny spoiler: there's a reason why they picked Jango Fett for the clones, because Order 66 was in mind, because Jango Fett was a Jedi killer. Huge influence in my delving into Star Wars. Great backstory, good comics by Dark Horse if you ever get a chance to look into it. Phenomenal comics about Jango Fett, and just a ton of lore there. I'll finish it off with this, because this is what really got me. There's a quote, I can't remember, it was one of the original authors for one of the comics back in the day for Jango Fett. He said, everybody thinks that Star Wars is a 2-sided blade, right? Jedi and Sith. But it's not. It's a 3-sided blade. You've got Jedi, Sith, and the Mandalorians.
Yes.
And if you don't understand that there are 3 major components at work in the galaxy throughout its entire existence, you won't understand Star Wars.
No.
So if you don't understand Jango Fett, if you don't understand the Mandalorians, you're missing out on a huge component of Star Wars. Gotta dig into it. That's my plug.
Okay, so we've got Kyle Katarn, we have Jango Fett.
Joel, I'll let you go last, and I'm gonna go with, so I don't actually, I have some experience with the extended universe, but I actually am not a huge I like canon stuff. I'll put it in the positive. I like canon stuff. So I'm going to go with someone who, any of you Star Wars, nerds out there, this will be very basic, but we're not talking about the Star Wars nerd. We're talking about the Star Wars novice. And so if you want to follow a character kind of their entire arc and see them from young to seasoned, I think that Ahsoka Tano is one of the best characters in Star Wars to look at, aside from some of the really good people. Yep, yeah. I mean, they have done such a phenomenal job with that character. That she's not a core movie character. I'm not saying she's up there with the Anakins and the Obi-Wans and whatever, but she is such a good character, so well developed, well executed, and if you follow her character, she will drag you through pretty much everything that isn't a Star Wars movie. Pretty much, there are a few exceptions, but she takes you through Clone Wars. She gets you involved in Rebels. She gets you involved in The Mandalorian. She gets you involved in I guess she has her own show.
She has her own show, but I mean,
that was kind of the most disappointing of her character appearances, if we're being honest.
She's in The Mandalorian,
yeah. So she will be a great introduction to so many of the other aspects of the universe. So
Ahsoka Tano is one of the only cartoon characters that has made me cry. And if you've watched Clone Wars all the way through, you know exactly when I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yep. So, all right, Joel.
Brant, I am very glad that you mentioned Ahsoka Tano. Also, particularly the section on Fulcrum is one of my favorite sequences, and it's incredible. And yeah, we'll just leave that there. If you don't know who this is, you guys have got to go and do some digging there. For myself, we're going to go a little more old school, a little more EU, and a little more before Disney messed with things too much. And that character is a character named Mara Jade. And Mara Jade is essentially, well, I want to say kind of the inverse of Anakin.
Right.
And worked as the Emperor's hand. So with the rise of the Empire, the Emperor brings her in as kind of his personal, like, wet work assassin, force-powered, but not Vader level. Like, much more in the nuance, sophistication, clever, creative. And there's a remarkable arc with her that is, and yes, I'm not, spoiler, there's a bit of a redemption arc that is really a remarkable story with her that explores a lot of themes where you start broken and how to get out of that, and what she goes through and the barriers she faces and how that resolves is truly epic. So if you want to see a character that will take you down a really interesting journey with some epic adventures, Mara Jade would be the one I'd point to. And if you really want to make me get into an argument with you, I'll tell you that she is canon and I can point to her in the movie. But that's really heading into the nerddom, and we'll just leave it. We'll leave it at Jabba's palace and then go from there. So that's the one I would suggest.
If this is your first time listening to us or hearing about Project Pathfinder, you can head to the projectpathfinder.net website to find out more. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course at the Project Pathfinder HQ YouTube channel. Subscribe to the Pathfinder Report wherever you're listening so you can catch future episodes, and we hope to see you back here next time.
May the Force be with you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.